REDD is reducing emissions through deforestation, but then it gets more complicated, including reducing it through stopping forest degradation, and REDD Plus adds on biodiversity, community relationships and so on. So it can be almost anything you wish it to be.
It is meant to be an economic incentive mechanism that will make it more interesting, more profitable for countries and communities to change the way they handle forests in such a way that the overall global deforestation trend is changed.
Well, the main funders broadly are UN, EU and World Bank are very key at national level. Norway, NORAD is a key funder also at that level, and are also funding work at project level.
Norway has been the biggest REDD funder globally, but we have a number of other countries, also donor countries, coming in, and we have a number of multilateral organizations coming in. The main recipients in terms of money is Brazil, and it will be Indonesia, it will be Guyana, it will be Tanzania, it will be DRC. These countries have received fairly large sums of money, and a big number of countries have received a limited amount of money for their readiness processes.
In Brazil, the government has been trying to reduce deforestation for many years, and the results have been mixed, and I think it's important to have a different approach to what they have been doing before, which has been usually trying to do command and control actions, and a more incentive-based sort of approach, I think is a good add to the policy mix of things that are being done in this area of forest conservation. And REDD obviously integrates the whole action that have been taken in the countries into an international effort, and it's important that all countries sort of act in the same framework. That's why I think REDD is a good way to frame the issues relating forests and climate change.
I think if you look at the literature on what drives deforestation, weak forest governance is a major issue. My point here is always that it's not only weak forest governance, also who are the drivers of deforestation, who benefits from deforestation, from business as usual of deforestation that we see in many forest-rich tropical countries, and what kind of governance then can really respond to that problem of deforestation and tackle the drivers.
So for RECOF, basically we understand that if an external actor such as a company or government come into a community, quite often they will cause conflict because they bring in their ideas or their needs. And basically quite often these conflict with the needs of and the interests of the communities. So basically REDD is another example of this. It's an externally driven concept program, and it can come into a community and basically stop the community living their lives, can infringe on their rights, can stop them making a living, and so it could be a big threat to communities.
What we find in the project then is that you find instances of cooperation in trying to resolve conflicts, and you also find instances of conflicts where cooperation cannot occur because some actors involved in REDD have very contrasting objectives and very contrasting priorities around forest resource use.
The thing is that REDD Plus brings about incentives and disincentives to some groups. So there are already been conflicts around forests. Nepal is under community forestry, wherein the government provided rights and entitlements to the local community. But there have been tenure specific problems on tenure where communities, indigenous groups, Dalits, they have been struggling for their rights. So REDD brought to surface some of the problems. So that is one. The other is that there have been ongoing resentments around participation of disadvantaged groups. So the third findings that we have is that the existing policy effort on REDD that tends to postpone the problems. They want to defer the problems, and they want to hide problems and then sort of take more ad hocist solutions.
This conflict dynamics can actually be found on multiple levels. So it may be in the governance levels where REDD+ is designed, and all the actors that are surrounding it there, so the political economy that takes place on that stage. But also at the local level, where you see that REDD+ is being implemented. Maybe the communities didn't have a say in how REDD+ was actually designed at those higher levels. So that may lead to people crowding in around funding that's arriving, and it may also lead to them losing their livelihoods in the forest, which was always their territory they lived in, and now suddenly it's an area that's part of a policy, and it's an area in which you could even say that the natural resource is monetarized. So there are other people that have interest now in an area that used to be the provision of a livelihood. At the same time, we can also wonder, is it only REDD+ that we need to be worried about, or is it a much wider spectrum of policies that are being made, or all sorts of economic interest or global trade routes that are part of this? So, yeah.
Okay, there are some positive messages one can see in some of the country cases where there is induced by REDD+, some more discussions about tenure, where there are even court cases that are now won because there's international attention as well and international awareness.
We gained a lot of knowledge about what's driving deforestation and who are the ones that are the main drivers of deforestation and why. And I think this knowledge is certainly the main benefit. At the same time, this is more like a benefit for national governments and researchers and so on, and while the people they're there like needing the means and the like technical assistance and technology and so on to really reduce deforestation, they are the ones that received the few part of the resources and not the large amount of resources.
In some cases, we see reduction in deforestation. That is clearly the case in Brazil. Some may argue that this was already starting before REDD came on the table, but our belief is that the REDD funding has enhanced the work of Brazil in such a way that it has helped reduce or continue the process of reducing deforestation. And in many countries, the REDD funding has contributed to policy processes that I see as very important. And these policy processes have brought on the table a lot of conflicting interests, but I think that's just a necessary step along the way to developing a new policy for managing forests in the future.
In Vietnam, we already have the laws on gender equality, but in practice, there are still a lot of gaps in gender access to forest and land, especially in the rural and upland community. But with the arrival of REDD+, we hoping that it will bring up more opportunity to talk about gender equality in order to meet the requirements set by REDD+ about social and environmental safeguard.
Aside of very clearly preserving the forest itself, it's the broader benefits to the communities around it. So security of land tenure is often quoted, but it's a stabilising action of everyone agreeing on what people can do, where, and who's in charge of it. A lot of work in, again, an overused word of gender, but improving those gender relations and improving livelihoods and actual income to communities.
The idea of implementing REDD has pushed these countries into implementing things that are basic for any other type of forest conservation policy that you want to do. For example, monitoring has been something that was basically not well done in these countries before, and the whole payments for environmental services REDD debate has pushed the government into action, into improving monitoring, improving satellite imaging, improving field monitoring of things. So I think REDD, even if it's not showing results yet, I think is one of the drivers for an improvement in the conditions that will lead these countries to eventually in the future do some good policies for reducing deforestation.
One of the main challenges that governments in these countries face is to involve those actors who are indeed willing to participate, but because of very high costs of attending meetings in the capital of the countries, they don't. And therefore, in this sense, I mean, one of the lessons that are relevant for policymakers from our project is that more public budget needs to be dedicated to reach subnational levels of governance, and especially, you know, the capitals of different regions where forests are a relevant resource, and try to bring the organizations and the relevant individuals of those regions around the table. So in terms of participation, that's an important lesson. The second lesson in terms of early implementation activities is that projects need to be much more sensitive to the social and cultural context where they are implemented. And by social and cultural context, it's again a very broad interpretation, and I'm also referring to questions of tenure, questions of property rights, who own the forest. Projects need to go beyond, you know, the legal circumstances in which people live, and also look at more casual relations of access to the forest. Who are the actors that have a stake in the forest and who might be invisible to you as a project implementer because they don't figure on, you know, the national legislation, but in the local context they're very important in actually managing the forest and in understanding why some resources are being used and why they are not.
I think that the social factors should be taken into account more profoundly. Dominant actors like the government, like the private sector, like some international actors, donors, can have an interesting view in designing policies, in designing laws, but what I found is that and not very often the community's point of view is taken into account.
If we also include other types of subjects in under the REDD debate, such as consumers and other types of measures, for example, demand-side measures are really useful in terms of reducing deforestation, because then you really create this chain of actors, of different actors working together for the same goal, instead of just going there to the ones that are on the ground and saying you are the ones that need to deal with it. And then when you create this different chain of actors, and they all have a responsibility in reducing deforestation from the demand side to the production side, then you are able to really change the status quo.
There is still persistent, lack of understanding and consensus about who will benefit out of REDD. The government has, is intent on holding its power on, forests, because there are sort of contradictory, arrangements about providing whose rights on forest produce and carbon.
Environment is sadly not the main priority of cash-strapped developing country governments. They want to reduce poverty, they want to improve access to sanitation, they want to do whatever, many other types of social policy that come before prioritizing environmental issues.
I'm still very positive about REDD+, because I think there is something, but I wish this is something would become clearer and also more measurable in terms of actually avoided deforestation. What I see these days happening a bit is that there is a race to the bottom at the international level. Everybody is waiting for each other. So I don't move if you don't move.
If it wakes up to all the knowledge that we gathered from all this time of REDD implementation, if all the proponents and all the actors involved in implementing REDD realize this knowledge and internalize and learn from it, because actually there was this period of learning by doing with REDD. We were actually trying to learn from all this experience. So if we actually are able to learn, maybe REDD has a future, and this future would need to concentrate on these main needs of like forest agents that are on the ground and need different resources, not just financial resources, but like technical and capacity building and education and even things that are related to their well-being, such as energy and things like that.
I feel that there's a global movement towards higher environmental consciousness in many places. It kind of started like in European countries. They're thinking about how do we do something to save the forest, because we cut all of ours, but we have some in other places, so we should like help them to conserve theirs. This is getting slowly into the consciousness in the countries as well, and from the consciousness moving towards institutions as well. And because of that, I see progress. There's a lot of work to do, but I think REDD, as a part of a policy mix of forest conservation policies, I think it does have a future, definitely.